Happy to be joined on the Big Ben Show today by Aimee Huber. She's the executive director at First Choice Women's Resource Centers. You can find out more about them at firstchoicefriends.org. That's first with one ST, choicefriends.org. Also, Gabby McIntyre, who's an attorney with the Alliance Defending Freedom. You can find out more about this case that we're about to talk about at adflegal.org. I listened to the oral argument in front of the Supreme Court yesterday. Give me, Aimee, just your initial reactions to what you heard from the justices, and then I'd like to get into a little bit more of the details from the case. This was obviously something that has been debated, and so people may be familiar with it to a certain degree. But what did you think the key points were that the Supreme Court brought forward during the oral arguments yesterday?
Certainly. First of all, I can say it was just surreal to be there. Mm-hmm. I've never been in the U.S. Supreme Court. And so I had to pinch myself many times. Not even as a tourist. I feel like I should go on a tour soon to see more of it. But to just sit there and realize that this was our case, a pregnancy center from New Jersey, was just amazing. Mm-hmm. And so the key points I thought were brought forward very well by Erin Hawley, who did our oral argument, and the questions from the justices really seemed to get to the substance of the case, mm-hmm. which is that our First Amendment rights were being violated by an unlawful subpoena from the Attorney General. So
just in context, the Attorney General in New Jersey starts to go after you when? What's the first indication that you're basically being targeted in a way that is designed, obviously, from, I think, any rational perspective to create pressure on your donors and the like?
It was November 15th, 2023, when a representative from the Attorney General's office came to my office and issued me the subpoena commanding us to release up to 10 years of documentation on our donor communications, our advertising, and even our donors' identities. Mm-hmm. So our legal battle started a little over 2 years ago. And
First Choice Women's Resource Centers, how long had you been a part of that?
I just celebrated my 35th anniversary there.
Great.
And our ministry has been in existence for 40 years.
In terms of how many people, how many women you deal with in the encompassing sort of roles that you have, what sort of numbers are we talking about?
We have served over 36,000 women in our 40 years and their families.
Mm-hmm. And the services you provide, I assume, are typical of pregnancy centers along these lines?
They're all free of charge. They include pregnancy tests, options counseling, medical confirmation of pregnancy via ultrasound, and a whole host of material services and support for women in unplanned pregnancies.
Is a lot of this referral-based where you're sending them, they have questions and you're sending them to places that can provide them with additional support and the like in the community?
Yes. If we don't provide those exact services that they need, we will refer them.
And the support that you get from the community, from your donor base, is that mostly small donors? Is it the kind of thing that you see, frequently across the country where, it's a community basically coming together to say this is something we want to do?
Certainly. It's smaller donations. We receive no public funding, no government funding. Mm-hmm. And so we're a smaller nonprofit, not a national entity.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've experienced, and I support a number of these different entities, and so does my wife, in different states that we have connections to and communities we have connections to, is that this is one of those areas where a small amount of money can make a big difference.
Yes.
And that those things add up, and it's, the fundraising appeals that you're getting are not for, come buy $15,000 tables at our annual fundraiser.
That's
they're correct. They're much more small dollar. But this is the sort of thing where also that's an area where intimidation, in my experience, tends to work more in terms of driving people away. Where, if you're a major donor to a lot of these national firms and you get flack from people, you're more likely to dig in your heels because you're confident. Mm-hmm. And for someone who's giving a small amount of money, they don't want to end up on some list. They don't want to end up, having to respond to, neighbors who don't like where they're standing. In terms of the reaction that you had initially, what amount of thought did you give to complying with the subpoena?
I would say that was a very small consideration, honestly, because the impact on our ministry and on other pregnancy centers across the country would be too great if we were to comply and to not stand up and fight it. Mm-hmm. So from the beginning, I had a very supportive board of trustees who said, yeah, we need to stand up because this is wrong and the implications are too great if we don't.
Why did the Attorney General pick you?
That's a very good question. Perhaps it's because we're one of the largest pregnancy centers in New Jersey. Mm-hmm. So perhaps if we could be targeted, then other smaller centers could be targeted more successfully.
Is there a donor interest on his side that particularly, has clashed with you or gone after you? I don't know. I haven't gone through and looked at it, but I, assume that the kind of dollars that you typically get, flowing in that direction are people who don't like the kind of work that you do.
Can you repeat that again?
Is there any kind of donor backing or anything like that you think might have played a role in him targeting you? It just seems like something that's...
I understand.
It seems like something that from the outside, it read to me as performative. And in a way that I always kind of ask, okay, so who asked him to do this?
Well, it's important to realize, I think, that before we were served the subpoena, a consumer alert was issued against pregnancy centers in our state, and it's been confirmed that there was communication with Planned Parenthood and with the abortion industry in issuing that.
So that kind of thing is something that we've seen as well across the country, as you said, and this is kind of the legal weaponization to go after that and pursue it even further. In terms of ADF's role in this, Gabby, when did you first become familiar with the case?
Yeah, so it was pretty immediately after the subpoena was issued. We got into contact with Aimee, and you could kind of see the writing on the wall, especially given the Attorney General's open hostility towards pregnancy resource centers and pro-life groups in general. And especially, after the Dobbs decision was leaked back in 2022, we saw an increase in hostility just generally towards pregnancy resource centers and pro-life groups. There were fire bombings. There were threats made to individuals who staffed those organizations. And leadership in those organizations. And so when you see a demand, for example, for the names and the contact information of an organization's donors coming from a very openly hostile Attorney General, that raises a lot of red flags. And we saw those from the very beginning.
There's also, I think when people hear a subpoena of donors in this case, it's important to make clear that this was not just about getting the names of people who'd given you money. This was about getting access to everything that you had done over the previous decade. Is that something that you've seen before in any case, either of you? Because that seemed to me to be pretty. That's an enormous burden on a relatively,
Yes.
Not small, but small by the comparison to the people coming after you organization.
Yeah, this was my first time coming across a subpoena like this, but it's, the subpoena, you're exactly right. It was extremely broad and sweeping. It asked for up to 10 years worth of sensitive information, including that information about donors, their names, their addresses, their phone numbers, the last known place of employment. So it really dug deep into that, and that's constitutionally protected information. And, after the oral arguments yesterday, it was never more clear that this is government intimidation dressed up as law enforcement.
I was actually surprised by how weak their argument was, because I assumed that they would have more to dig in on that. What justification did they ever offer for this level of intrusion into the way that you have these relationships with largely small donors across the state and the like?
Well, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, you go ahead.
Well, the Attorney General, in his pleadings, and then also we heard at oral argument yesterday, there were no complaints. Justice Thomas really focused on this. He repeatedly asked counsel, were there any complaints against First Choice? What was the reason why you initiated this investigation in the first place? And they conceded there were no complaints, no underlying complaints from donors or from clients. Their argument in the pleadings was that, just based entirely off of supposition, if a donor went to First Choice's website, maybe they wouldn't have known that it was a pro-life organization, and maybe they gave to the organization thinking that it was an organization that provided or performed abortions or referred for abortions.
This has been a claim that they've advanced in other instances across the country in terms of attempts to, and I've largely seen it in the context of attacking the online promotion of various pregnancy centers and the like, accusing them of of flagging them to Google and things like that, of misrepresenting themselves because they don't offer abortions. Of course, that's something that is just, it completely, it's designed to be an argument that, is impossible in some degree to rebut, because no, you don't offer abortions, but that doesn't mean that you can't promote the pregnancy center, and that, as you can with any other, offering or NGO or social program that's of the like, was when you had that kind of burden in terms of the degree to which they were going to intrude on your donors come forward, Aimee, what was the thought process on how much effort, time, and expense it would take to have actually met that subpoena?
I honestly don't know how to quantify that, because it's so overwhelming and so burdensome and so daunting.
Yeah.
Up to 10 years? It's hard to even imagine how I would be able to comply. And that subpoena gave us 30 days to comply.
Mm-hmm.
I can't even imagine it.
It's obviously you are dealing with much higher stakes involved, and of course your case went up to the Supreme Court. But when the NLRB came after me over a tweet that I had put out, and their subpoena covered any interaction, including interaction about sources, about editorial, about anything associated with that, for me and my employees at the time, over the course of the previous 3 years of the publication. That's an incredibly invasive, abuse of any kind of free speech ability. It would expose all sorts of reporting processes and everything like that. And it also would have been just impossible given the number of writers that we had for us. And at the time, the thought that I had in my head is, this is the punishment. They don't actually care what the outcome of the case is. And of course, we defied them, or I defied them personally, because the case was about me, and we ultimately won. But the point is that that moment when I was like, they're seriously demanding to see this much. It's impossible. That's not something that we could provide. And I'm not sure if it was 30 days, but it was a similar amount of time. And so that's meant to be the thing that punishes you or makes you want to give up or makes you want to throw in the towel. And to me, that's what's particularly frustrating about this case, is that you shouldn't have to get up to this level. You really should not have had to get to the Supreme Court, from my perspective, for this to be something that was thrown out. Why did it end up taking it all the way there?
Well, the Attorney General, throughout this process, it's been 2 years since this lawsuit was initiated. He's been trying to keep First Choice out of federal court. And so the issue before the court yesterday was simply, can First Choice get to have its day in federal court to adjudicate its federal constitutional claims? And again, we heard this is a targeted attack. It's weaponizing the power of the New Jersey Attorney General to go after his ideological opponents. And when that happens, litigants and recipients of these sorts of intrusive subpoenas, they need to be able to litigate in federal court to check that state action.
The experience that you've had, I'm curious, Aimee, have you had people reach out to you, contact you from within the kind of work that you do in other states across the country, who've had similar experiences, maybe some of them who have chosen the other path, in other words, thrown up their hands and said, maybe this is something we just can't do? Or have you had anybody reach out? You don't have to say who they are, behind the scenes basically, and say, hey, good on you for standing up. We couldn't. Oh
my goodness. That's another thing that's hard to quantify. All of the contacts, all the texts, the calls, the emails. We are behind you. Thank you for doing this, because you're doing it for all of us. Thank you for standing up so that we're not targeted too. The support and the prayers have been so encouraging and really have helped me through what's a marathon and not a sprint.
As someone who's new to the Supreme Court experience, what surprised you about going in there to see these arguments play out?
I think sitting there, I felt the weight of it. I was hopeful, I was prayerful, I was ready, But to sit in that seat and realize that these 9 justices, that what they decide is going to impact a ministry that is so close to my heart and so many other organizations, was very weighty. Mm-hmm. This is the end of the line. Please do the right thing. Mm-hmm. So I think the gravity of it and the weight surprised me. I was very encouraged, though, by how it seemed that they saw the essential arguments that we were making and how important they were.
We're familiar, Gabby, in Washington with a lot of the previous targeting that's happened of various groups underneath the auspices of prior administrations. Obviously, one of the most prominent of these was the targeting of Tea Party groups aggressively by the IRS. And in ways that were completely tied to ideology, were not justified by the facts of the case. And that's something that still to this day, from my perspective, there was not enough consequence at the time for the IRS doing that. And there's been, I think, additional instances since of abuse of power that is essentially by bureaucrats, as opposed to we think about it mostly in the context of elected officials, but the enabling of bureaucrats to basically ruin the businesses and lives of lots of people across the country at the federal level, I think is familiar. What is less familiar is the ability of state actors to do so. Yeah. Is this something that ADF is tracking generally as being something that is an increasing trend across the country?
Yeah, and especially in the context of pregnancy centers and pro-life groups, this is part of a larger trend of hostility that we see. And I mentioned, after the Dobbs leak, all of the threats and the actions taken against these pregnancy centers. And then you see government actors in states like New York, California, Washington, Delaware, Vermont, New Jersey, instead of coming alongside these pregnancy centers, which are providing vital resources to women and families in their communities and supporting them, they have chosen to go after them with either these intrusive and invasive civil investigative demands, these unlawful demands, or by passing legislation, for example. We've seen that in a number of states, legislation that is specifically targeted, like Colorado, for example, tried to ban abortion pill reversal, ban individual practitioners from using progesterone to attempt to reverse the life-ending effects of the first abortion drug, mifepristone. So you're seeing that come from various angles in the states, but this is part of a larger trend, and we're hopeful that if the Supreme Court is very strong in showing that this is a First Amendment violation, that they will be a little bit less inclined to take those unlawful actions.
The court has been pretty consistently good on these speech issues in recent years. Yeah. When it comes to the concerns that you have about other areas where pregnancy centers and similar entities are being targeted, where do your other concerns lie beyond kind of the donor issue? We mentioned, for instance, the flagging of different places when it comes to promotion. Are you concerned that states are going to try to get around or find some loophole that effectively allows them to, if they can't shut them down, shut them up when it comes to the promotion of these centers and the like?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've been seeing that in a number of states. As I mentioned, there's these civil investigative demands and these subpoenas that are attempting to intimidate and harass these pregnancy centers. But then there's more targeted attacks, too, on specific speech. For example, in New York, we actually just got a really great ruling a few days ago on the eve of these arguments in the NIFLA versus James case, where the Attorney General in New York is attempting to stop pregnancy resource centers from simply talking about abortion pill reversal. That's the same thing that I was mentioning in Colorado that they tried to ban the practice of. It's literally just using progesterone, supplemental progesterone, to attempt to give a woman an option to try to save her child if she chooses to do that. And so we see these targeted attacks on pregnancy resource centers. They're coming after their speech. They're coming after their actions, trying to stop them from practicing their religious convictions. That's the case out of Colorado. And then in the case of these investigative demands, we're seeing that in California. We saw it in Washington, in New Jersey, obviously, in this case. And so it paints a broader picture as well. Like even the East ACLU, for example, filed an amicus brief or a friend of the court brief in this case, because they realize if a state attorney general on this side of the aisle can come after First Choice, they can come after me as well.
I'm not going to ask you to say this, but the amount of throat clearing in that filing was just like, it was just very evident that it was like, okay, we don't really agree with this, we don't really want to go along with this, but we have to say this because it would go against everything else that we claim to stand for. But when it comes to, you mentioned the religious side of this, do you see a situation where more of these groups, and I should ask, is First Choice, does it have an actual religious affiliation, or
Yes.
is it broad based?
Yes, we're a Christian ministry.
A Christian ministry, but you're not tied to a specific diocese or a specific branch of Christianity.
No, we're
Okay.
faith-based,
Okay.
but all different churches support us.
It makes me wonder if we're going to see a trend where more of these entities like yours try to take more shelter in a closer relationship with a church or something along those lines as a defense mechanism against some of this because of the nature of some of these fights. And, obviously the court is the way that it is now, but it may not last that way forever when it comes to the free speech side of things. Does the religious side of this argument offer more protection for some of these entities than just making the speech argument?
It certainly could. It's one of a few claims that we brought originally. Of course, it's been 2 years, so we haven't actually litigated the free exercise claims, but it does provide another avenue to challenge, especially under the First Amendment. The First Amendment is just a little different, right? So you have this chilling aspect. You probably heard it quite a few times during the argument yesterday.
Yes.
If exercising...
Was I listening to a Coors Light commercial at some point this year, the mountains blue?
Yeah, it's a little bit nuanced, but what it boils down to is, is the government doing something that makes exercising your First Amendment rights scary?
Yeah.
You don't have to wait until they actually physically stop you from associating, physically stop you from speaking. If it changes your behavior in that way under the First Amendment, then that is itself actionable, and that gets you into federal court. And so the religious component does add an extra claim.
Do you view this as the argument yesterday? I think virtually everyone who is a good faith observer of it, I think, would say that it was going your way, and that this was, you can't always read everything into oral argument, obviously. That's what everybody always has to add as a caveat, but it just generally seemed to have that tenor. In general, is this something where you view the legal trajectory, Gabby, as being one that is going your way on the arguments here across the country, or is it one where the forces that are allied against these types of pregnancy centers are actually pretty emboldened, and they have a lot in terms of the different weapons that they're going to try to use to shut these places down?
Yeah, I think they're emboldened either way, to be honest, but the legal trajectory certainly does seem to be a good one. Especially, we've had that victory in Colorado. We had the recent victory in New York, and it really did seem like the justices too. They were catching on to exactly what this is: the weaponization of the state government to go after their ideological opponents. And you heard it, even Justice Jackson chiming in too after, you had, who was it? I think it was Justice Alito. He's identifying that this, if they have to litigate in state court first, they'll never get to go to the federal court. And Justice Jackson says, well, are you really saying that? Is that really what we're dealing with here? And of course, New Jersey had to say, yeah. Mm-hmm. Especially under New Jersey law, that's exactly right. And that just can't be the case.
Do you view this as a situation where they're going back home up the Acela corridor with their tail between their legs? Or is this more, we tried something and now we're going to just find a way to try it differently?
Well, we're certainly hopeful that they're going to think twice before taking unlawful actions, and doing so brazenly. And our prayer, obviously, is that, maybe they will back off. They won't want to try and to get this information. There's no reason for it. The subpoena itself is unlawful. And so we're hopeful, and we're really hoping that First Choice can get back to doing the work that they want to do, and that they've been doing so well for 40 years.
What's your focus on as you head back?
Getting back to the work that we've done for 40 years. We didn't think that we would ever be involved in a legal battle, not in a million years. But when we saw what the stakes were and the fact that the women and the babies that we serve are worth it, And we've got to continue serving them. And other pregnancy centers need to do the same.
Aimee and Gabby, thank you so much for taking the time to join the Big Ben Show today. You can find more about First Choice Women's Resource Centers at firstchoicefriends.org. That's first with one ST, choicefriends.org. Thank you both for taking the time to join me today.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.